So here are the steps in inequality. Technically, the first step is to copy the problem on your paper. You'll have space on page 70 and 71 if you need some. Now, the first three steps are just like when you solve any kind of equation. Nothing really changes. So the first thing I ask you to do is to circle, squiggly, and line. If you can hopefully remember, do you remember which one we circle? The y. And we squiggly the, yep, and we underline the one without extra y. So that's just to know that move and which one stays and which one goes together. Okay, the second step is you need to start moving things so that we can isolate. Sorry, that woke you up, right? So you're going to have to move so we can isolate the y. I had to plug it so it's properly. So how do we move things? There's only two things you can do to move things. You don't just erase it and write it somewhere new. Does anyone remember what are the two things you do to move something? Yes, and there we go. We subtract and add. Kendrick, you're on fire. I just had to unplug that thing, huh? Okay, so do you remember when we subtract and when we add? We subtract, there we go. We subtract if it's a, perfect, it's the opposite. And we add if it's a negative. Alright, it's going to go away for just a minute so I can clear it. Space. So that's how we do it. We either subtract or add. We do the zero pair, the opposite. If it's positive, negative. If it's negative, positive, it's the opposite. Now, when do we do this? I'm sorry, not when. Why? So we can get the y by itself. To isolate the y. Because we're solving for it. Okay, so if it's not a circle, then it needs to move because we're trying to get the y by itself. So that's why we circle it so you can see exactly what needs to move and what different kinds there are. Okay, so we've done that before. Hopefully something new, and this is so far easy. So we move it, and then so after we move things from the y, what do we do with the y? We do something. There we go, divide. Okay, sometimes we multiply, divide, simplify, you know. Okay. We don't do this every single time. You only do this in certain times. We only divide. Do you know when we divide? Something's got to happen, and then you're like, oh, this is what we divided and why we divide it. Something with the y. It has a coefficient. That's not 1. So either something, which means a number, is in front of. So if something is in front of y, that means y has a coefficient. It could be 2y. It could be negative y. It could be 6y. It could be negative 7y. But if there's something in front of that y, if it has a coefficient, if y has a coefficient, that's when we divide. Alright, so this hopefully is not new. We've done this before. You remember how to do this. The only thing that's new today is this part that we're going to do right now. This is something new and different because it's an inequality. So this is the last step, step number 4. So again, this is the brand new thing. Everything else before this we've done before. This is the brand new thing. You listening, Kendrick? If we divide by a negative, then you have to flip the inequality. We have to flip the inequality. That means if it's we flip it, and and it becomes greater than. If it's greater than, it's less than. Okay, I know that looks really weird on the screen. By a negative, we flip the inequality. Do you mind getting the door, please? So we're going to do an example. That way you can see all the steps put together. So we're going to do the steps. So we'll say it's 4x minus y greater than negative 8. Alright, and so we're going to circle, squiggly, underline so we can see the different ones. I copied the problem. I'll do one on IXL in just a minute. That way you can see an example. So I'm going to circle, squiggly, underline. So the 4x, Jamarian, I circle, squiggly, underline? Do I circle, squiggly, or underline? Squiggly because it has an x. The negative y, Nazelle? The minus 8, Yep. And then we're going to draw, instead of a solid line, we're drawing a dotted line because we're talking about inequalities. Okay, pretty much the first 3 steps are all the same. Circle, squiggly, underline. So we have sides. We have this side, the left side, and the right side. The circle's on this side. Again, it's all about the y. We're just trying to solve for the y and isolate the y. Got it, Kendrick? So on this side, we don't really care technically about this side because the y is here. So we can only have y's. We can only have circles. So Lila, what should I move? What should I move away from the circle? How do I move Jacob a positive 4x? Yeah, minus 4x. That's a squiggly. So I do this, that becomes 0. I'm going to move that to this side. So you do the same thing. Now, because this is an underline, you write it next to it and not under because they're not the same kind. If they were the same kind, I'd write it next to it. So I moved it. I did my circle, squiggly, underline. I moved it, and now I'm going to bring everything down. I'm going to see if I need to divide. So I bring down this negative y. I bring down the minus 8 and minus 4x. Kendrick, are you taking these notes? So is there something in front of the y, Leonardo? Is there something? Yeah, there's a negative. I don't see the number because it's not written there, but I know Elvis 1. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 1. Now this part you could do in your calculator if multiplying and dividing are not your greatest strength, and that's totally fine. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 is a positive 1y, so we just write y. Negative 8 divided by negative 1 is positive 8. 4 divided by a negative 1 is a positive 4. Don't forget the x. So I moved, I divided, and now I'm going to see if I need, so do I need to flip this inequality? It was greater than. Did I divide by a negative? I did, so that means I have to flip it. And that is my final answer. So we're going to do another example together.